Can't control many things. The only thing we can control is our input. We start with a time budget, time appetite, and they say, for this idea, my appetite is to spend 2 weeks full time. Great, high intensity mode.
Why am I eating pineapple and pizza then?
I want to ask, just in general, how many sacrifices do you feel like you need to make to create your own businesses and be successful? Do you need to be that guy that goes on a $50 Airbnb on a mattress on the floor? Is that required?
I think a lot less than what people think. I think what's important, in my opinion, is a sense of urgency. I think this is where I had my epiphany, where look, I did the classical mistake, like almost everyone does. That I quit my job, and then I had some idea, a light bulb moment related to my interests. I spent most of my time at Amazon building databases and building API services, and I sort of consider myself an expert in databases, API services, and I said, I've been programming for all my life. Why shouldn't I build a database as an API service for front-end developers? And I wasn't completely naive that I thought it's going to build it and customers will come. I started getting influenced by marketers and building in public and the getting attention, Gary Vee and other people. And I figured out the ingredients. But I think the big mistake that I did was thinking that this was going to be a predictable thing. A little bit like how I worked when I was an employee. When I was an employee, I was giving goals. We need to hit these goals. And you try to break down the goals into smaller steps. You reach the goals, and then, you get promoted or you get a bonus, or at least to keep your job. It was a predictable world. It's like playing a video game. You collect the 3 stars, and you.
It's very linear. It's very linear.
Very linear, yes. Predictable, I think, is not necessarily always predictable. Like when you're an employee, sometimes you think you're going to get promoted, but you don't. But more or less in the realm of predictability, you tend to expect what you want. And I approached self-employment in the beginning the same way. I thought, look, if I build a great product, and if I do the right marketing things, I get attention, build in public, build a following, and I build some credibility, then surely I will succeed, right? I'm just going to do the right things. And I did.
This sounds so easy.
Yeah, it sounds easy, right? I was super naive. I think I completely missed the huge amount of randomness, opacity, things that you can't understand, the complex systems of the market, why something works and why something doesn't. It's very almost impossible to predict, right? I think. And I actually, to jump a little bit on a tangent, even when I was, and then I was reflecting back, like even when I was on Amazon, like I was working in AWS, I started at AWS when there were like just 5 services, and when I left, there was almost 200, right? And I've seen the evolution of AWS from being something tiny for small developers, right? like a fringe thing, to becoming one of the biggest businesses in the world, used by pretty much everyone. But even from the inside, like despite Amazon having all the resources that you could imagine, all the money, all the cash, all the brand recognition, excellent engineers, business people, all the things that you could imagine you would want, the company had them. And even then, right, out of those 200 services that AWS has today, I'm not going to break my NDA or share any secrets, but only a tiny really make money, like a very small fraction. And you start thinking, how come someone with all that information, all that data, all that resources, all the benefits, all the advantages? And now I start to realize that business is much more random than it seems, that whether something works or not relies on human behavior, whether it resonates with people, whether the market really understands it, pricing, the competition, all things that you can't really measure. And I think that's what I missed, right? So I spent the first 9 months, in this whole building a product called UserBase, which still exists, right? But I did the typical problems. I would just immerse myself into it. I was doing stupid financial decisions, like, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but since I was treating it like a big deal, this is going to be my life's work, For example, I hired a
You're Mark
lawyer.
Zuckerberg, basically.
Yeah, basically, I was just I hired a lawyer, for example, to write my terms and conditions, and I spent
Oh,
like two
that's a
thousand
good one.
dollars. I'm embedded, literally, I'm embedded now to say that, but back then I thought my reasoning was almost quite logical. Like, yeah, there's going to be something so inconsequential to my life. Why not just spend some money now? I'm going to spend it anyway. Eventually, why not do it right in the first place? And I hired some people to help me because I was getting impatient. And look, I got a lot of attention. I was building a following on Twitter, had about 10,000 followers. When I launched it, I was #1 on Product Hunt. I was on the front page of Hacker News. My launch tweet got like 500,000 impressions. It got liked by Paul Graham of Y Combinator. I got public endorsements by the CEOs of Vassallo and Netlify. Like, I was getting all the signals that I wanted, lots of validation, that quote unquote. I did this like validation now. Maybe we can talk about it more. But eventually, right, it turned out that this product has customers, still has, but it's only making about $10,000 a year, not a month. Right? And considering how much effort I put into it and how much money I spent, probably it will never recoup what I've spent, both financially, let alone the time. And sort of that gave me a big. I went through a small crisis of anxiety, I have to say. That was very brief, maybe 3-4 days, where I literally was waking up at night and barely sleeping. Like, what am I doing? 9 months
But
already
this
passed.
is worse than the gig at AWS then, right? It was getting
Yeah,
there.
it was. I mean, I was confused, right? I mean, basically, because 9 months passed in a blink of an eye, and I had quite a decent amount of savings, but it wasn't unlimited. I had maybe 4 or 5 years savings, right, which was certainly good, but I almost wiped out a quarter already in a blink of an eye. That I barely sort of saw them coming, and I realized, look, if I don't do something. And I keep doing going this path, very soon I'm going to spend another year, and then suddenly I'm out of savings, and then I'm going to have to go look for a job again, back where I started. And I think that bit of anxiety, I think, suddenly opened my eyes, because then I started thinking, okay, look, I don't really care about user base, actually, right? What I want to do is just maintain this lifestyle, as we were talking about before. I was enjoying this flexibility, and I started thinking, okay, what do I need to maintain my lifestyle? Basically, I need to pay the bills, right? I need to pay my mortgage, the utilities, the important stuff. So I started to work backwards from that. Like, what's the easiest way for me to, make $2,000 this month, just to start as a smallish goal? And I started thinking about these things, like these small wins, and like taking a freelancing gig here, doing a small product here, nothing with any ambition that this is going to be my life's work or something that's going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just, I want to pay the bills this month. Then next month, I'm going to try to pay the bills again, and then the next month again. And as I started doing this, what I started to realize that actually these small wins, first of all, every single month was becoming a bit easier than the previous one. You learn more. You learn about more what works, what doesn't, what I'm good at, what I'm less good at. Sort of, you learn more about the market, what is more likely to work, and so on and so forth. You build more reputation, more credibility. You get more contacts, build an audience. I had ever-growing customer list, and so on and so forth. And then sort of, I think what I started to realize is that actually, right, because it's easy, many of us like to think, I'm doing something for the long term. Yeah, we like to say that, yes, I'm building for the long term, I want to succeed in the long term. But I started to realize that probably the best way to succeed in the long term is to succeed in the short term. Like, there's these sayings, to thrive, you must first survive. I'm a big Formula 1 fan, to win the race, you have to finish the race. Like, the order is important, right? You can't die, right? Because metaphorically speaking, right? I mean, whether it's in business or in racing or whatever, the order matters, right? So these small wins were basically not only keeping me alive financially, but they were also opening new opportunities. Right? Yeah. But they were also opening new opportunities for me. And actually, now I say, look, the things that I'm doing now, or even the things I was doing last year and the previous year, I would have never imagined in a million years. Like, if I locked myself in a room and I started brainstorming all the things that I could be doing, I had to stumble on these, right, by doing these small projects, small experiments. Right, I wouldn't have stumbled into the creator economy, doing products, courses, communities, all this stuff. It was really just happy accidents, bouncing into random stuff. And
It's
this is like
really,
team. Yeah,
really interesting. Sorry to interrupt. That
no.
Mark Liu said basically the same thing, that the way
Yeah,
he arrived at his ideas was that with each project he would see a
exactly.
problem and he would solve it in the next one, and that's
Look,
how it's snowballed.
I think if you start studying successful creators, entrepreneurs, I think this is a very, very common theme. I remember the creator of Tailwind UI, Tailwind CSS, Adam Wetton, probably he was one of the first people who I heard him say this, and I was following his journey quite closely. I respect him and out of curiosity. And one time I remember he saying, I would have never in a million years imagined that I would be working on a CSS framework. Right? It wasn't where he started, it wasn't what he was trying to do, but randomness, right, takes you to different things. And I think it's important to embrace randomness. This is, I think, what Mark Liu does really well. Peter Levels does this really well. Many others, Danny Postma, many others. Tony Din, for example. Lots of small projects. I think this is what this mentality of small bets, ship fast, 12 startups in 12 months, whatever it gives you, is this embracing the randomness of things, right? You try different things. Some things work, some things don't. And I really believe that this is what I try to, hopefully convince people that the right way to self-employment, entrepreneurship, in the hacking, whatever you want to call it, isn't this predictable thing, right, where you think light bulb, you lock yourself in a room, light bulb moment, I have an idea, I'm going to work hard on it, put it on the market, cross fingers, and something will happen. But it's really this embracing of, and which, by the way, when you think about it, again, to be maybe a bit more philosophical, this is not that different than how VCs work, how book publishers work, how even movie studios in Hollywood work. There's a great book by a guy called R. Devaney called The Hollywood Economics, who studies the Hollywood economy and basically concluded that almost nobody knows anything in Hollywood. Like if you try to ask directors or CEOs of movie studios to predict which movies are going to be the most profitable, nobody has a clue. That we think we know that in hindsight that some movies are going to make it, but when you look at the profit, which is the most important thing, it's really hard. And when you think about it, where is it hard to predict whether movies are going to be successful or not? It's hard because it relies on human behavior, right? For a movie to be successful, you need people to go to watch it in the theaters, and they'll be so impressed that they go home and tell all their friends about it, and the friends come and they also multiply, bring more people, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, nobody has figured out human psychology's source code, right? It's just a complex thing. It's like the weather. That's why we have the chaos theory, the butterfly flaps the wings in the Amazon forest and causes a tornado somewhere else. Same thing with human behavior, right? We're just complex. And going back to why even AWS, despite all the resources and everything we mentioned, even AWS struggles, right, to put successful product after a successful product, is because even with all the information, with all the data, with everything else, you're relying on human behavior at the end of the day, right? And I think the same thing for us. I think we're fooling ourselves if we think we're some visionary that we figured out a formula for success, right? I think the most reliable way of succeeding here is to be humble. I think, like, I see this a lot in, like, for example, Mark Liu, Peter Levels, right? They try things without a lot of expectations. Of course, they have a hunch, that you always have a hunch, or at least the hope that this has some legs, it has some potential, but you're not really putting all the bags in it. So I just like, think about VCs, right? Despite how much they think highly of themselves. If you go and pitch your startup to them and you impress them so much, they say, what is the most amazing idea that I've ever seen? Surely you're going to succeed. They're never going to liquidate their entire fund and go all into you. That just wouldn't make sense. They might say, right, yes, this is, and they might believe it, right? But they're prudent investors. And I think we're also investors of our time. Like, I really like to compare myself with VCs, that I think of myself as a VC for my own ideas. Instead of investing capital, I'm investing my time we get 24 hours in a day, right? Our time is as finite and as scarce and precious as money, right? And what's the best ROI that I have for spending my 4 hours today, right? And sometimes it's putting it in an existing project. Sometimes it's starting something new. I really liked when you had Mark. I think you asked him whether he's still building new apps despite having a big success now, and he said yes, absolutely. And I love that, right? And I think even if you're not building, I said now personally, I'm not building something new, but I'm still with the radar on, waiting for opportunities to pounce on things, even though I also have a successful thing that is dwarfing everything else. But I just want to continue to build like that, yeah.
Sorry, but how it's possible that with your background, you didn't jump in the VC world?
No, I think I immediately, not immediately actually, I think, when I mentioned at one point, something clicked in me that I realized, full-time employment wasn't the right thing for me. I think the default was the Y Combinator part, whatever. But very quickly, I think I got convinced that I would end up in the same situation, beholden to different people, probably even more restricted because, when I was employed, at least I could give my 2-week notice and forget about the business and forget what I was doing, and that's it.
Now you need to give the 2-week notice to yourself or what? Yeah.
No, well, I mean, if I were to get investors involved and I have strings attached and maybe not necessarily contractually obligated, but morally or ethically or whatever, it's not like somebody gives you $500,000 and 2 weeks later you say, I'm fed up of this idea. I'm just going to, I'm going to shut everything down. I mean, maybe you could do it. You have you don't want to let people down. Right? Nobody wants to let people down. So I very quickly realized that would probably even worse than employment. And then I started looking at the odds of success and sort of personally, I think I'm not against VC in general as a finance instrument. Elon Musk raising VC to build SpaceX completely makes sense, but I think especially the small SaaS businesses, right, where you just have an MVP and you try to go to this go big or go home route. I think it's neither helps the founders, neither the customers, and I think the only people who get to benefit from this is the VCs themselves, right? Because the VCs basically they operate in a completely different world, right? It's like they care about the portfolio, right? I mean, it's like I look to compare with this analogy, right? Imagine you're digging for a hidden treasure underground. That that there's some treasure hidden in some area and you're digging. You want to find it. It would be very foolish if you pick one spot and you keep digging hard and you keep digging and you keep digging in the same spot and you buy a new shovel and you work 40, 80-hour weeks digging. It would be very foolish because if you pick the wrong spot, no matter how hard you dig, you're never going to find it. But at the VC level, it doesn't really matter. Right? Because if you have a portfolio, a company of people digging, and you spread them around, eventually all of them will strike gold, even if all of the others sacrifice themselves. Right? So eventually all of them will find the treasure hidden close to the Earth's magma, which will be full of gems. And there you go, right? You make it big. But what about the individuals? The individuals are experiencing a completely different thing, right? And I don't want to be a bat in somebody else's portfolio. Right? I don't want to be one of those soldiers in the army of the VC. I want to be my own VC. That's why I like to compare that analogy. I want to have my own 12 things, right? I want to have my own portfolio of projects. And then those things, yes, I treat them more like cattle rather than like pets. If some of them die, whatever. It's something actually I take a lot of care about because I think it's another insidious trap that we attach too much. Look, I want to be proud with what I put out in the market, and I have lots of, I think I have a high bar of ethics and standards and principles, whatever, but this business at the end of the day, right? Whether something works or not, no, it's what it is. And maybe this thing doesn't deserve my attention anymore. And I fear that if I attach too much of my identity to it, it will start to jeopardize my rational thinking. Oh, it's my pet, my baby. I don't want to feel like that. Right? So
You actually said something very interesting that I want to touch upon. Selfishly, I kind of had this in my notes too. And it's specifically around freelancing. And I remember one of the posts you've made way back where freelancing was maybe 25 to 30% of your revenue. And I found that, so it was a way for you to diversify the revenue streams, and you had quite a lot. Did you stop doing freelancing, or do you still take some gigs?
So I'm not doing any right now, but if I find a good opportunity, I would take it. Look, that's another mistake that many people do. It is believe that they don't want to trade time for money. Like, what if you're getting paid $10,000 an hour, just to put an exaggerated number? I would take that, right? But what about $1,000 an hour? I would also take that. I think that's a good rate. $500 an hour. I would take it as well, personalized, even 250. Right?
You're gonna get a lot of DMs now.
Yeah. No, look, I think the idea that you shouldn't say time for money is quite foolish, because if the ROI is good, right, leaving that money on the table, and I think this goes back to, again, this fallacy that you should only build things that scale, that can work on their own, that make money in my sleep, blah blah blah, right? And I think you're not just leaving money on the table, but you're also leaving opportunity on the table. Look, initially I started doing freelancing, honestly, just to pay the bills, right? So when I mentioned that I had my debt crisis of anxiety, the first dollar, in fact, that I made as a self-employed person was through freelancing. I literally started thinking, how can I make $1,000 this month? I went to the contact list on my phone, and I said, who do I know? And I found somebody close to the end with the V's, who I knew had started a startup, and a while back told me if I knew any programmers, let me know. And I texted this guy and said, look, what if I help you take some things off your backlog, and maybe I do 10 hours, 20 hours a month, not even a week, right? Just very, very fractional, right? I just do a little bit. And he said, yeah, absolutely. He set me up, and I did that for about 8 months, I think, right? But then the next best gig that I had, I was working with Gumroad as a fractional product manager, right? I was helping Sahil, the CEO, where our arrangement was, we called it quarter time, right? So I had sort of committed to about 2 hours a day average, right? 10 hours a week, more or less, fully remote, on my own schedule, right? Again, sort of without any of the, Gumroad was very, very lean, no meetings, no sort of nonsense. And I did this for 2 years. It was a super great arrangement. And to be honest, I would have continued to do it. The reason I stopped was because eventually Gumroad grew big enough that it sort of, I couldn't keep up with this sort of fractional arrangement. And I really didn't want this to become a full-time job or anything like that. I just loved the fractional part of it, right? And actually, I think maybe that's one clarification I would do with freelancing. I don't want to get into some other, full-time like thing. I want the small things that give me more optionality. But yeah, absolutely. The Gumroad gig was paying me $10,000 a month for a couple of years, working 10 hours a week. Great arrangement, right? So and when you think about it, for example, then I had some success with a cohort. This is actually how the SmallBets community started. The best way to mitigate risk, I think, is to choose